anyways, you were saying about you guys are, but like you can have this niche group, and it got on John Dylan's radar.
Yeah. We started a little podcast because he kept calling for conservative-ish ex-Mormons because the conservatives, even funny kind of saying that because we're generally like classical liberals, but that's pretty conservative for ex-Mormons in general. But he kept making calls for people like that to speak up, and we would speak up and we would say stuff, and he would just ignore us or block us or push us down or something like that. So, and then another long saga happened with some people because a couple people who I podcast with, Flip Johnson, you might have seen him around Latter-day Lobsters, and Jared Higdon. Flip and I especially have been around the ex-Mormon scene for 20 years. Like we knew everybody. We'd been back on the old John Larson podcast for day. Like that was the bigger podcast before John Dylan picked up in the early 2000s. And we'd show up to a bunch of them. Flip was even on a bunch of the panels and that sort of stuff. And they were asking for criticisms from conservative-ish ex-Mormons, and we tried to give them some, and they just kept squashing us down. Then I finally got a hold of just answering comment sections. John Larson, who knew me, I'd been to his house and that sort of stuff, and I said I was typing under a pseudonym, but so then I said, "Oh, this is me. We've been to your thing. We've been at your Mormon Expression Studios. We've been over to your house." And then he just like denied it and said, "Well, I've never met these guys. They're crazy," that sort of stuff. And we were just like, okay, whatever. We don't need to be on your show to give criticisms. We'll just start putting our criticisms out ourselves. And that's where we just started Porch Time, was just pretty much straight up to start telling them the things that we had been meaning to tell them that they would never let anybody on to tell them, which is kind of interesting because it has all culminated up after all these years. Like Quick was just on this week with
oh, no way.
Yeah, just like 2 days ago. And that's actually part of the whole long process, because we've been there chirping and criticizing and telling them, and we know it gets back to him because we're also very good friends with Jonathan Streeter. And
oh yeah,
Jonathan Streeter's the one who really kind of pulled us up out of the Netherlands and put us on his podcast, and has been there and kind of supportive, and he pops up on ours here and there, and Jonathan will always kind of poke at them and tell them and say, "Hey, look at this." But yeah, I just made a general video that kind of made big waves around there, just criticizing John Dylan for his Me Too stuff, in the sense of, it was way back in the time of the John Kavanaugh stuff. Sorry if it gets spicy, you can cut it out.
Yeah.
It was during that stuff, and of course he came out saying, "I believe John Kavanaugh," and all that sorts of stuff. And I only came out saying the regression to the null hypothesis. I was saying, like, John, do you want us to treat you with the Blackstone formulation, which is better for 10 guilty, 10 innocent guilty men to go free than for one innocent man to be convicted, type stuff? Like, do you want us to give that to you the same way everybody should be giving it to Kavanaugh, if you're just like looking at this thing from just the base facts from when you know about it? And that one kind of just flew around, and I think from there we just got double squashed. They're like, they're no people, they're bad. And one at a time, we've each kind of gone and gotten kicked out of Mormon Stories Facebook and all that sorts of stuff, just slowly. But Jonathan Streeter has much more clout and knows them and is in with them, and he's always just kind of pushing on at them, saying, "Hey, I think they're kind of trying to say stuff that's more than just being jerks to you type deal. They're trying to give you pointers and trying to say stuff." And little by little, I would say that if you even watched Quick getting on there, that was from a long process of us saying and Jonathan saying that he needs to hear criticisms from a different side that view those things a little bit differently, and pushing all the way down. I think John was very fair to Quick in that discussion, if you sit and watch the whole entire thing. But
oh yeah, that just came out today, didn't it?
1 or 2 days ago.
2 days ago. Yeah, okay.
Quick had told me, because I'd been on Quick's podcast, I'd been on Mormons. What is it? Midnight Mormons way back in the time, and I'd been on the One Who Shall Not Be Named in Lobsters, the Jacob Hansen's podcast, and all that sort of stuff.
Oh yeah,
that's actually where this article was written about me came from. She saw me on that. And so just all those sorts of things. And of course, like over there, we're rowdy and we're jerks and whatever. We kind of like joke around that we're a bit South Parkian, but I think we're making real criticisms at the same time. I know we are, just mixed in with kind of just some humor of it and all that sorts of stuff. And So we got noticed. A bunch of people came and looked at it and said, "Oh, this isn't for me," because they were ex-Mormons, not liking to hear the types of stuff that we're saying. And some of the stuff we were saying were the things that were covered in this article that I showed you that you wanted to talk to me about, that got put out in Deseret
Yeah.
News.
Cool. Yeah. Well, yeah, I feel like getting into some of the specifics. So when I reread the article like a few times, and and I was actually surprised that this was not that the article happened, but that it happened so late. Um, like this, like you said, this has been like a culminating thing that's been rolling for years now, and even some of the citations, like some of the links that they hyperlink to, are like podcasts from 4 years
Yeah.
ago, and
I
things like
mentioned you
that.
guys. I
And
mentioned you guys to her, but it didn't make the article. And I don't think she personally missed it. I told her a ton of stuff, but I was hoping she'd pop that in
oh,
there.
okay, okay. We'll come back to that because I'm actually really
Mm-hmm.
curious. Um, but yeah, like I really feel that the winds are sort of changing. And there's even some data to back that up. Um,
Listen to the last fourth of the quick interview with John DeLynn. Listen to him change his tune. He was 100%
oh, really?
agreeing with almost everything I said, just in the sense of it's almost impossible for him to build community, and if community is the thing, uh, he doesn't think people should leave it, and secularism is failing ex-Mormons and all that sort of stuff. John
Mhm.
DeLynn said all of that at the latter half of the quick episode.
Wow,
Mm-hmm.
that's awesome. Yeah, I will definitely check that out. I didn't realize. Well, I don't really listen to Jonathan. What's his name? Pineker.
Oh yeah, Steve
Steve
Pinecker. Yeah,
Pineker.
he's our friend too. We haven't been on there, but he's
Yeah,
popped up
I mean,
on
I do
ours.
listen to him. Yeah, yeah. I'm just not a super avid follower. I like his stuff though. My wife's been on this podcast, and he's
I love
been
his
really
stuff.
good to
I
my
just think
friend.
some of it's a little dry because it is just straight up kind of book reviews and that sort of stuff. But
Oh yeah,
some of
that's
it's
true.
great. You know what I mean? But
Yeah. Um. Well, okay. So I remember listening to like a John Dehlin podcast years ago. I can't remember if this was before or after my mission. So I can't remember if I was a teenager or not. But it was like Terrell Givens and John Dehlin talking, and this was like 2015 ish, maybe late 2010s into 2020. And I didn't know anything at the time, right? I'm just a young guy. But I could already tell like um there's like an underlying philosophical discussion underneath all of this, like all this debate, that Terrell is like, I think he was definitely steeped in it because he's so well read and he's a professor and stuff. And John Dehlin was sort of like writing on the surface. But when it came to talking about postmodernism, in that interview, like the conversation kind of like became electrified. Like people were like, "Oh yeah, let's talk about that." And in the Deseret News article, you talk about how people, especially like the ex Mormon or even anti Mormon community, so to speak, they are sort of like repeating talking points that come from like a Foucauldian um, perspective, or some of the philosophy that he laid down, but they don't really realize it. And it wasn't really until I took a class on Foucault that I realized like just how predominant his thinking was today. And yeah, and I was like, whoa, to me, watching Jordan Peterson stuff, he was kind of like this boogeyman. Um, and I was like, okay, whatever. This is just some old 50-year-old philosophy. But then I took the class and I was like, oh, this is informing all
everything.
our worldview.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's the most
yeah,
cited
exactly.
professor. You could just grok it right now. He's the most cited professor in the
Yeah,
humanities, and the humanities is a whole half of the
yeah.
university. And then that has leaked over into all the other fields just as well. Like I could go off for an hour about Foucauldian prison stuff, criminal law and
Oh,
that sort of
yeah.
stuff. And um, but just to joke on it, the underlying thing we always just run a joke over on our podcast, the Foucault
Hmm.
thing, just to say it easily, is this concept of who's to say. That's what we say. It's like who's to say what's okay and what's not okay, and that's
Right.
all over the ex-Mormon world. But they'll even kind of repeat some of the talking points, as I said in the article, and not even really know that they're doing it, and maybe they're getting a little bit more aware of it because we've been at it, kind of poking them at this for 10 years. But I came in from a different point
Hmm.
because I was in graduate school and was exposed to all of that in the 2000s.
Hmm.
And that's really
Hmm.
kind of weird for people. Like if people just imagine I mean, it was weird for me because it didn't hit until graduate school. Like I was at the University of Utah.
Mm-hmm.
I did an undergraduate like in literature. I double majored, and I also did an undergraduate in literature just because of the time of how long it took to do stuff. I didn't even mean to do a double major, but it just happened because of they
Sure.
couldn't fit everything in. So I just took another class. Oh, so double major after a minute. And
So you did a double major in literature and in what else?
public relations, which
Oh,
public
okay, cool.
relations before social media. That's like doing computer science in 1973 or something like that. You know what I mean? It's
That's
got nothing
funny.
to do with anything.
Yeah, the game has changed
Yeah.
since.
And but I mean that part's dead and gone. There's some interesting stuff from that I carry over, like maybe like Marshall McLuhan's ideas of like the medium is the message is huge and that sort of stuff.
Hmm.
But from the other side of it, I didn't like undergraduate was just almost kind of like book club. You know what I mean? Like we're going to read these books.
Yeah.
They're good books. Let's look at who's the author. What does the author say? What voice is this in? What's the style? What's the era? And then all of a sudden we went to graduate school, and out of nowhere, I didn't know what was going on. 2003ish, 4ish. All of a sudden, I was supposed to read everything through Derrida and Foucault, and I'm like, who? You know, and everybody was like, the whole class was like that. It was just a bunch of, it was Spanish. It was a Spanish major, so most of us were ex-missionaries. You know,
Okay, yeah.
there was a few, you know, native speakers who were just there, nothing to do with like having learned Spanish and Mormonism or anything like that, but just having that suddenly dumped on us, and then in that time frame before anybody had seen it, and we're reading Judith Butler, and you're in your young 20s, and you're like, what on earth is all this? And then you're supposed to write all of your papers through those lenses, and it gets welded onto your face as the only proper way to review anything. And
Yeah, that's right.
so coming through that, like leaving out of it and just kind of thinking that was all weird and this is never going to pick up. I'm never going to see Mormon soccer moms talking about this stuff. And now I do. But like I was joking about how it didn't seem to really kind of mix the real world. And then it absolutely just did, I think since 2012, just come pouring out. And then especially came pouring out in the ex-Mormon world. Like, I mean, I think most people kind of leave under those philosophies more than they do just some sort of propositional disbelief or something like that. Some are still just like, I don't believe in angels or some sort of thing like that. But most of them they're leaving over Foucauldian social issues, if that makes any sense. People who
Yeah. So in our lab we surveyed like 2,000 Americans, and then we asked, like, you know, are you religious, are you not religious, did you leave religion, etc. And the group of them that did leave religion and haven't come back, like the number one issue that kept coming up for people was like institutional critique, you know, sexism, racism, some sort of like power imbalance, things like that. And I was like, oh, okay, that's very, one, it's like, yeah, I understand that those are like sort of valid criticisms, but two, it was very Foucauldian at the same time, you know. And so that was really eye-opening. And to me, what interests me, especially in the article for the Deseret News, is I was reading this other book that was a criticism of postmodernism, and what that guy argued was something like, you know, in these postmodern circles, you tend to criticize things like Eurocentrism or phallogocentrism or something like that, right? Um, and to put it most charitably, you do that because you're trying to call out bias in the system, right? You're saying, oh, you're introducing values into your system of thought, and that's not allowed.
into every word,
And so I'm
if it's there, into just the
yeah,
language, yeah.
and so I'm calling that out, right? That's kind of what the postmodernists would say. But then this guy's saying is like, wait, like even being value neutral is itself a value laden position. And so really you're just imposing you're just replacing your values, and you're putting those values in there, and you're guilty of doing the thing that you're criticizing. And so it's interesting to see. I feel like the new atheist, well, not the new atheist, but not the conservative who's criticizing the new atheist would say something like, well, if you get rid of God, there's no morality, and it's all you're nihilistic. But then how it actually plays out is you leave religion, and but you still have a morality that's
You make a
informing
new
your.
one, which people hate when you say that.
Yeah,
But
and not only that, not only do you make a new one, but you're also sort of like unconscious of it too. Like
you're
in the
just
article.
neutral. Yeah.
Yeah,
Our
exactly.
thing with
And
John Dehlin, like constantly, like most of our titles will say something about being super neutral. I'm super neutral. And you're like, you are not neutral. And in a weird sense, you're coming back at them from the same Foucauldian lens, just in the sense of saying, hey, if there's bias in everything, you're doing it too, you know? And
yeah, exactly. So I think it's hard to yeah. So in terms of community, it's like it's hard to build community when you are a neutral body or whatever you want to call it, right? Like communities have values. That's what they form around. You can't be neutral and form a community. It just doesn't work. Like you would have to basically snub everyone who comes into contact with you because they have their values, and you're like, nope, I'm neutral. So
yeah,
get
yeah,
lost.
you're imposing
Um,
that on me in some way. It's oppressive.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, you see it play out. I mean, a lot of people kind of joke around talking about it. I see it come up in Lobsters, just even talking about like Dan McClellan and Dan McClellan's critiques. And you say he's largely coming at it from a Foucauldian lens too, which I argue, but
Oh
he's
yeah.
constantly trying to get people to see that you are just using those scriptures as a puppet for your values. But everybody stops and points at him. One of the guys from our group, Kevin, actually made that meme of Dan McClellan being on the Art of the Deal and saying
Oh
it's
yeah.
the art of saying that you are just imbibing all of your biases into it while overlooking that you are, imbibing all of your values into it. But Dan McClellan says that, these conservative evangelicals go and do that to the Bible, all the while he is reading into it his
Mhm.
his 2021 neoliberalism into the Bible, which must have
Yeah,
always been
exactly.
there.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's weird. It was weird to see I feel like the new atheists were and people like I might be getting this wrong, but even people like Sam Harris, they kind
Hitchens,
of had
Harris, Dawkins, and Dennett. Uh,
yeah, well they kind of had like an anti-Islamic bent, right? Cuz they were like right after 9/11,
It was
and they
100% that,
were
but then Harris is the one who kind of redirected it to the Christian one by writing the letter to the Christian nation after that. But that plays in this whole story too, because we were there and around for all that. Flip and I were, and another guy on our channel named Troy
Mhm.
Levitt. You might have seen Troy comment around.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Troy is he was the uh, he was the game runner of that Harry Potter game that got run out of it for HR
Oh.
issues type stuff. Yeah, he's a famous dude if you look up like what happened with that. But he used to run around the amazing meeting with what's his name, the magician who would go around debunking the magicians, Randy.
Oh, I saw the
Yeah,
documentary, right?
yeah,
Like he's famous,
yeah,
right?
the,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
debunker. But that was all around the same time that they did these new atheist conventions, and there was even one in Salt Lake City, and they were huge. And they blew up. Why did they blow up? Like they fell apart. There was gigantic, huge,
Mm,
huge meetings of these atheist meetings. And some of it was, well, number one, David Silverman, the guy who ran the whole thing, got Me Too'd in this sort of way by Matt Dillahunty's
mm.
wife, if you know who Matt Dillahunty is.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
But beyond that, too, is
Rick
that from
Dillahunty.
Foucauldian things, they all started saying, we don't want these four white guys, the four white horsemen of the apocalypse,
Oh, right, the Four Horsemen.
pushing their biases onto us. We need to have this and that and this. And they had a community going and they blew it up. And that's just kind of
They blew
one
it
of our
up.
jokes with like this running things. Like you guys are going to go try to make a community. There was a famous moment. It was called Elevator Gate. I don't know if you ever heard about that.
Oh, was that it was in Mormon
No, it
circles?
was
No,
with
I don't think I know
Dawkins.
about.
There was a woman
Uh-uh.
who was part of this podcast called "The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe," which I used to listen to religiously. Who said that they would just kind of go around debunking food woo and stuff like that. But she suddenly went to one of those meetings and she said that a man had hit on her in an elevator and that caused like a major HR issue. And Dawkins said, "Oh, come on, get over it." And that one thing alone became such a huge thing that it blew up those meetings. They started putting out these huge, like kind of HR memos of things that you had to sign to go to them. And different people like Peter Boghossian would show up to it and he wouldn't leave his kids. If he went anywhere, he had his kids in his room with him to have them there as witnesses and all that sort of stuff, because
Oh
it spiraled
wow, that's
into any sort
crazy.
of worse kind of purity culture that you could imagine. Then like they say some sort of religion
Yeah.
does that, but it turns into the
Right.
worst of the worst. Uh,
Yeah. I was gonna say because I remember, or at least in my if my memory serves me right, it's like it started as a anti-Islamic thing, and then it went woke because it criticized the anti-Islamist whatever thing, right? And then yeah, Me Too happened, and there's this like really hard political
there's
correctness
no
and cancel
forgiveness in
culture that's
that world.
still.
There's no repentance over there.
Yeah, exactly. There's no forgiveness in that world. Yeah. So it's to me it's wild. And also I was on Jonathan Streeter's podcast a while
Yeah,
back,
I was watching that
like a
live
long
when you
time
were on.
ago. Oh yeah, I
Yeah,
remember. I remember you commenting actually. Um, but I remember like it was interesting to me that I could tell instantly like it was not like Jonathan and you guys were like unwilling to go woke, and I was like, oh wow, like this is refreshing because um the woke had such a strong hold on the culture. I think now with Gen Z, like these kids don't care, right? They're just like having fun.
yeah,
It
it's a little
For
bit.
millennials, like yeah, for millennials, like it was kind of like a sacred cow, and now that sacred cow is just like retiring.
Yeah, it's retiring, which is a
Um,
good thing, although it always lurks in certain places. But part of not going woke, because the wokeness is just the extreme critical lens on everything. If you even like look at the people from like the Frankfurt School, they have this belief of like the
mhm,
negative, the
yeah,
negative dialectic that we're going to criticize everything into the utopia, and the only way to get to you can't say what the utopia is. You can't posit anything.
right.
You can only criticize your way to it. And that's part of the thing was, and we realized part of all of that was just the extreme endless criticism in and of itself beyond the lenses and all that sorts of deal. And part of it is just the oikophobia. The oikophobia is the concept
Right.
of like the hatred of your own,
The
and
hatred of home.
hatred
Yeah.
of home. And so many of the Mormons get this sort of oikophobia for the Mormonism that they owe a lot to, that they were brought up into. And I think almost every single one of us are a little bit more on that level. And I don't know, Jonathan's gotten to a point where he's stopped creating content entirely. I think he's
Jonathan
basically
Streeter.
announced it. Here and there he'll put stuff out, but he says he refuses to criticize something that forms a good community now and that sort of stuff.
Oh wow,
Mm-hmm.
that's incredible. Wow, that's crazy. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to see this arc like I think we're definitely at a turning point. I hate that term. It's been
Got
ruined.
stolen away.
Got stolen by Mr. Kirk. I mean, I actually never listened to Kirk,
I didn't
but
follow
all the
him
buzz around
terrible
him.
much. I mean, I saw like little shorts of him before and everything, but
Yeah, I knew he existed. My friends would go to his events, and then like I mean, I kind of checked out of politics. Like when Biden took office, I was like, oh, I can't keep up with all of this stuff. Like it's too much
that's
drama.
good.
Um, um, but anyway, yeah, I feel like there's a turning point where I do think it's generational. Like I think young people are um like young people aren't listening to CR podcasts and listening to Bill Reel and tuning into John Dehlin. Like teenagers are having fun, they're goofing off on TikTok. And so like some of these values, even though they're negative values of the woke anti-Mormon crowd, let's say, are I don't think are being transmitted to the next generation, which is really interesting to me. Because I feel like um I think that will actually be a good thing because instead of alienating yourself by eating your crowd alive, by constantly criticizing them, people are going to find some sort of community. And I think that's a good thing for both Mormons and people who leave the church, is to have a sense of community. I think that there's a brighter opportunity for them to develop community, although that's just a hope that I have. As of now, like it's been a
Well,
disaster.
I don't think there is one
um
for the ex-Mormon community, really, and I think that's one of the things John Dehlin laments at the end of that quick episode. If you listen to him, because I think John has put good faith effort into it by trying to create his Thrive institutions and all that sort of stuff. But one of the things you find out with all those things, just like happened with that atheist convention, is you can't keep snakes out of the garden, man. Like you can't go make the perfect thing, no matter what. Like everybody levies this criticism at whatever, like some sort of sexual abuse in a church or some sort of thing like that. And then you like look at the rates of it and you say,
in
if
public
something's
school, yeah.
that big, it's going to have that amount of stuff happening into it. So if you grow to a sufficient size, it's just part of
Hmm.
the snake in the garden. It's part of the universe. It's part of what's going to be there, and you can't keep like a clean utopia. But beyond that is they realize that there is a secret sauce in religious world that they can't create from secular ideas or values. There's not something that binds and
Yes.
blinds them in there. It blows up before it even gets to any sort of level. Like there's like a certain threshold that it can even get to, but that might just be too that you can't have like some identity or group based off of a negative idea. Like
Right.
we are the anti or the ex Mormons or something like that. But yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that doesn't work. Well, so yeah, in our lab we study development, adolescent development amongst religious teens and stuff. And yeah, I mean all the evidence points to that religion is like really good for people's development as teenagers because they have access to mentorship and access to peers and access to other adults that other people who don't go to church like they sort of don't have that as much of an opportunity to do so, and the schools are not that great either at it. But at church, kids get to, they get to serve and they get to bond with other students or other kids, and then they get mentored by adults. And yes, there are bad things that happen, of course, that shouldn't happen. Adults abusing their positions and being perverts and all that stuff. Um, but overall, I mean, the social science is showing that yeah, overall, it's great for adolescent development.
beyond just your
Sorry, go
peer
ahead.
group and your friend group and all that sort of stuff, because I mean it's huge with scouts, and I've seen scouts. I saw the Salty Saints just covering scouts this week, and I think even they were kind of underestimating it. When I went on with the Midnight Mormons, that's what I told them is like, you guys, like that stuff was killer. It's stuff that should get back and it should be back in there. But um, what was I going to say? The thing that this Betsy who wrote this article, she was really smart to start it out with like the very first line of it is I had told her that, but I didn't like start off with that. She was smart to like pick it out as the main thing to go off with. Is just the very first line is I don't know any little old ladies,
Mm,
and that's kind of the point. Is like even if it's just like your friend group or something like that is something I've realized when I went to church for a month this year with my friend Kevin from the group, and I being out of it for so long, I was shocked. I shouldn't have been shocked, but I was shocked that he knew all his neighbors. I was shocked that he knew them all
mm,
well. He knew what was going on in their lives. He told me what was going on with that person over there, that person over there. I was like, oh yeah, like oh my gosh. And then right in the same week she mentions it, a lady came up to me in Costco who knew me from the wards growing up. And she just like knew all the little
oh,
beats of my life and all the little things that I'd done. And I was like, oh my, like you didn't even like realize this larger nested community that was there. And I don't think there's much of it. Like people say, go donate your time at Big Brothers, Catholic Big Brothers or something like that. I'm like, okay, but where's the little ladies or the Maya maids or the young couple getting married there? Where's my
mm,
neighbors? Where's there's so much more than just like some participatory friend group, but then also probably, especially during the times of scouting and all that sort of stuff, one of the best places around for that, at least for me when I was growing up
yeah,
into it. But
that's awesome. Wow, yeah, that's a great story. I do want to pivot because you had mentioned Latter-day Lobsters to the reporter, and we were all kind of sad didn't get into the article,
yeah.
right? but tell me about like, I mean, you've been in lobsters for a long time, and I feel like lobsters is now kind of like getting on the map in a lot of LDS spaces, like people know about us and stuff. And it's been kind of a weird, what's the word I'm looking for? It's been an interesting balancing act because
Yeah.
I'm getting ready to go to grad school. I don't want to get canceled. Jordan Peterson is like the most cancelable person in academia. And so like I've been flying under the radar for like years at this point. But within LDS groups, like people know us. But tell me about like what was your conversation when you brought up lobsters?
I mean, I think I was talking about that, just people who bat around these different types of ideas and the concepts that maybe just go beyond like a Sunday school discussion type stuff. I know Connor Boyack. I don't know if you follow him at all.
Yeah.
He just put out a video a couple weeks ago about Sunday school being boring or something like that, and he thinks there should be another class for people to get kind of a little bit wild. And if there was a
Deep
place for
doctrine
people to
class.
get a little bit wild, maybe it's like Lobsters, like a little bit, and or Jacob's group over there, or stuff like that. But you also kind
Oh
of see
yeah.
how like that wouldn't work in a super public, everybody's welcome setting, because you're like, okay, some of this stuff's getting really theoretical, or really out there, or
Well, I think the one advantage of having a Facebook group is that you can block
yeah,
people. You know, like you're like, oh, I hate this guy. I'm just gonna. But you can't do that at church. You
yeah.
know, you can't block people.
But it's still good that people can explore wild ideas and get feedback and pushback and even arguments about that type of stuff. And I just brought it up as a place where, because I don't know if you guys are discussing things like, one of the things, because you're just talking about the generational stuff, and one of the things I was talking to Betsy about was just the cycles, larger cycles, and some different. She had heard me on Jacob's podcast, and we were talking. Jacob got really canceled. He's really in trouble for that podcast with John DeLynn. I don't know if you knew that, because he came out, and it's starting
What?
out with me and Jared criticizing John DeLynn's daughters, saying that it looked like they were going to not have children, or that sort of stuff, and maybe
Wait, hold up. You need to catch me up on this T. So Jacob Hansen is getting way canceled because of
he
comments he
took
said about John
he
DeLynn.
took down that part of the podcast because he got really in trouble with it. And John DeLynn, when he was trying to set up a debate with John DeLynn, or even a discussion, one of the sticking points was that John DeLynn had gotten really offended at this episode. And
Oh, and how long ago was this
a
episode?
year and a half, 2 years
Oh,
ago.
okay, so this is a while ago.
And
Okay.
people will even still bring it up on Twitter or something, saying, "Did this? Were you on this podcast where this thing happened?" That sort of stuff. But Jacob was making like a larger point, which actually kind of goes with like those generational cycles. And I as I do with the Betsy thing, was actually presenting myself as one of the people who could fall into the same pits that maybe John DeLynn's daughters were, just in the sense of I left 20 something years ago, and the entirety of my adult life, I mean, I've, as the article says, I've got a girlfriend now, and I've had girlfriends all along, and I've been successful, and I've all sorts of stuff, but I didn't have kids in a family and all that sorts of stuff. And I ended up in the same spot that Jacob's worried that John DeLynn's daughters are.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, because I'd mentioned it, but I just have it here, but because I was going to mention it because it was part of the lore of the thing. John DeLynn's daughter wrote this book called A Little Book of Ace, which is the little book of asexuality. And so it kind of gets into like those types of identities and that types of stuff. But Jacob was making a larger point of continuing generations and that sort of deal. And I brought up some different philosophers who've gone to those sorts of things, like Oswald Spengler or Arnold Toynbee. People are always mentioning like the Fowler stages of faith, those where it's like you get more and more and more philosophical. But Nietzsche, Toynbee, Fowler, not Fowler, Spengler, these people mentioned that it's not this progressive straight up to super philosophical stuff. It's a cycle. It falls off. Like after the philosophical part, super, super overly philosophical part hits, it almost always just collapses, just dies. And Toynbee studied it like across like 130 different civilizations and that sort of stuff. They're kind of famous for talking about declines of civilization and that sort of deal. And I was putting me in the same boat that Jacob was worried that John DeLynn's daughters were getting into. He's making the point, but he did come out a little bit in his spitfire or hyperbolic way and talked about him, and it really upset John DeLynn that he spoke about him in that sort of way, just talking about their appearance and that sort of stuff. But he was trying to kind of make a point at that people, especially in the ex-Mormon community, they think everything's just this progression. We're going to this progression of super high-minded philosophy, and it's actually an Ezra Taft Benson cycle of pride. It falls off after and has throughout history, type deal, stuff like that. But those types of ideas,
that is interesting.
Those types of ideas were the types of things I was talking to her about. Like, there's all sorts of LDS people who think about or talk about or get into these types of things or talk about culture and all that sorts of deal out over the internet, and the Lobsters are one of them, or they're one of the places that people could go check out or check into to do that. But then she didn't put that in, so
that's all right.
Yeah.
one day we'll get featured.
Yeah.
but it is I think it is strange. I think it is strange that Lobsters has sort of built a small community. Like we're not big, and we're not the most popular. I feel like what's it called? Faith Matters. I feel like they've built a big thing, right? We're nowhere near that, but but people have like come into the group, and I feel like because we do like online or like in real life socials every now and then, there's sort of like a community building slowly, just mostly a group of friends. um but again, to me it's so strange because we're very pro free speech. People can say a lot of things, people can criticize the church. Most people in there are faithful. uh and people are just very irreverent, I would not have guessed that it would appeal to like the average Mormon, but it has.
Yeah.
And people who are former members feel at home because we're irreverent, we're not so stuffy about certain things. Sorry, what were you
Yeah,
gonna
it might
say?
be the place. Like I said, it might be that exact place Connor was complaining about not having a church. And it's like, well, check in on one of those Facebook groups. They talk about all the stuff, man, or sorts of deals. Because I totally get how, like I said, if you're doing some local like the church every single week, maybe that's not the best place to be getting wild with ideas and that sorts of thing. But it's around. It's definitely around, and I think that's also part of one of the things that it's one of the reasons the Midnight Mormons brought me on some years ago.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that too because I loved it when they were called Midnight Mormons, because I feel like every Mormon family has that experience like around midnight where people start talking about deep
Yeah, for
doctrine,
sure.
and they kind of start going off the rails, and that's those were fun conversations
Yeah.
growing up with my family members.
Well, so much of
Um,
ex-Mormonism is going around and announcing to people that you were taught something where you probably likely more heard it from one of those midnight conversations or something like that.
yeah, exactly.
But because we'd all been there. But yeah, part of the deal too was those is I had when I first left like forever ago, and people were talking about
Mm,
20 something years in the 2000s, even like at the start of John DeLynn when he was coming out with stuff, it was 100% just criticism of the propositional problems. The Vervaeke stuff,
yes,
like the
okay.
four P's. There's you got to have
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the propositional, the perspectival, or the participatory, and I always forget
The
one
procedural,
procedural type
yeah.
stuff. And all of it's way more important than just the propositional. But the ex Mormon critiques in that time from were just the propositional. It was just like CS letter stuff minus the any sort of just sexism or some sort of deal like that. It was just straight. Well, I don't know if this thing happened, and I don't know if that sort of thing happened, type deal. And then it all shifted. It all shifted to a whole different world. But there was a sense back then, especially on the internet, that active Mormons didn't know about any of that. And there's a sense
Right.
now that nobody doesn't know about it. So what are you going to
Mm.
do, RFM? Like another episode of the Kinderhook plates? Like, oh boy, let's cover this one for the 85th time or something like that type deal.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of true. But like, yeah, I feel like that is a line of defense that like people who are very pro Mormon take. They're like, oh, we're hearing this, for the 100th time. Ex Mormons they don't have any new arguments, blah blah. That is kind of true. Well, and that brings me to a question I've been keeping is I remember talking to Marty forever ago. This was a few
Did you
years
do
ago.
her
Actually,
podcast?
I
She's
did a
on Bill
podcast.
Reel's channel with what's it called? It's Wherever We
Yeah.
Go.
Uh
Marty's
yeah.
kind of come around a whole lot like Jonathan and I. That's one of the reasons she was brought up with Betsy. She didn't want to use her name on it for a while because she didn't want people to even know that she was ex-Mormon, but she finally agreed.
Yeah. No, Marty's awesome. She's super sweet. And I remember talking to her, and I remember she was talking to me about like kind of how she left, and she has a background, I think, in engineering or
She's
something
an
that's like
engineer
highly,
now still. Yeah.
yeah, highly mathematical, right? And for her, she said something like, for me, it was like an epistemological collapse. Like I couldn't defend or like sustain the beliefs of the Mormon Church, and so eventually I left, and then and she's been really thoughtful about it since, but that does always come to mind, like there is this, one of the problems with um and I think Jordan Peterson brings this up. There is this like procedural, participatory, um, perspectival knowing that you're engaged in, but I would say it's all implicit and it's all implied, and like there's so much you can't really articulate. Like you don't know, you can't quantify just how much of an impact scouting
Oh yeah,
or serving the little old ladies in your ward has on you. Social scientists can't really do
and the
that
whole
either.
community.
They do their best.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's really hard to say just how much of that is like influencing you and doing all the heavy lifting. Um, but and so the thing that you can deal with and kind of sort of like write down is like the propositional stuff. Like, do you believe in the Book of Mormon? Is there evidence, archaeological evidence for this and that, or whatever? And even those questions are poorly formulated at best. But I think for people who are sort of struggling with a life in the church, or a life, they have one foot in, one foot out. um I and the apologists do their best to sort of address some of these issues, but I don't think, actually, I'm pretty sure
The
it's fun. It's
the propositional, like I mean,
yeah, yeah,
like they do their best to address those.
like
The rest of them, beyond maybe just attacking the culture, I think they very rarely have anything to address. They've got no answers for the rest of that. They have no answers for the other three P's.
who.
The ex-Mormons. Like
Yeah,
the
well,
ex-Mormons,
okay, yeah,
yeah, yeah. They like the only place that they can hold their own is like on all the propositional stuff, because just even the simple sense of saying I don't believe in an angel or something like that. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm.
But the other four P's, they got nothing. You know what I mean? They got nothing to replace
Yeah.
the participatory, the maybe little meetings or something here and there, but yeah.
Well, I'm trying to think so when I did our study with we've done several studies now at this point. Like we did one with like a large American sample. We did one with like a longitudinal study with youth, and we interviewed all these kids that are LDS and their religious development. And what we learned, and this is not like a fact, this is just an observation, some more research needs to be done, but we kind of picked up on a pattern that a lot of these kids, at least in this sample, in these two samples, a lot of them weren't using social media. And so this idea that like John Lynn's podcast is the driving force behind people leaving is just not true. I don't think people are leaving because of like RFM or like these podcasts online. And at the same time, I don't think people are coming back.
What is it mostly for the larger majority of the young ones?
Well, I would say for the large majority of the people, it's like this Foucauldian like critique that sort of instilled.
I don't think it originates with John and RFM and those, but like nowadays TikTok, like there's just such a barrage on TikTok of somebody just saying, just kind of signaling that it's not cool or that type of stuff. And
yeah, and that's a good point. Like I think it is true. Like on social media, that worldview is sort of like it's in vogue, and people are that's just how we speak, and so people are getting that message probably through social media. But I would say it's
friend groups.
It's almost like
where are they getting? Because that Foucauldian turn, which is 100% there, which is just the hard critique of everything that has been around, and of course, I don't know if you saw, like John Bennett put out like a whole series on Mormonism. It's like a faith re-examined or something like that. It was really recent. It was like 2-3 months ago. There's like him and that Jana something. I think she's in Jana Spangler, whatever. She's in your thing.
Oh, Joanna Spangler?
No, Joanna, not Joanna Brooks. Jana something Spangler. She's in Lobsters or something like that. And
yeah. She does like stuff for dialogue.
Yeah, right? And John DeLynn, all those types of people. But if you watch the whole entire thing, it is, I almost call it's like an EEOC audit of the Mormon Church. It's like they just review it on if you're properly passing the sexism, the racism, like it's just each episode. It's John Bennett put it out with the Imagine Dragons producer, his older brother.
Daniel Reynolds?
Yeah, and it's his older brother is like the producer of it, and he's like the manager of Imagine Dragons.
Oh, are you talking about the video series?
Yeah.
Like the like the one on YouTube. I can't remember what it's called.
There's like 8 episodes, but it's just like each episode is like a different, like if you go to graduate school and you get in that Foucauldian stuff, you just learn how to critique stuff through each one of those angles. It's like, oh, here we're
Yeah.
doing this totally new thing. I'm like, no, you're doing the same thing that's been done everywhere in everything for the past 40 years. That's why Foucault's the most cited person in all of everything.
Yeah.
Everything is like, take a book and let's examine it through the sexism lens. Let's examine it through this sort of lens.
Right.
But somehow, whatever that is, it leaked to John Bennett, who I'm sure, as far as this stuff goes, is a normie, like in certain sorts of ways. But he's doing
he
it. But how do the kids get that? Like, is it just in the school system?
Yeah, I don't know, because that's a great question, because it's like these people, when we ask them, and we ask them explicit, like, did social media affect your religious development? They say, nah, I don't even use it. So it's like, okay, so that's not directly influencing them. So where are they getting these messages? And I'm willing to concede that, like, because it's so prevalent, like, it leaks in through social media.
It's just the whole,
but I don't know,
whole society right now.
Yeah, it's the whole society. It's just, we're in this postmodern moment, let's say.
Well, it's getting
so
post.
I don't know exactly. Yeah, we are getting close to post, which is cool.
Yeah.
There's some cool stuff brewing.
Well, I think everybody's way more aware of this, because if I mention these sorts of things, and I'd talk, my friend Flip, who's on the podcast, could talk about, I would bring it up in like 2010, and they'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, these guys are talking from this angle of bias, and that you can't look outside of your bias, and that the bias is oppressive type stuff. And now everybody, in some senses, kind of is more meta aware of that sort of thing, I think.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Well, anyway, my original question was something like, so I don't believe that the ex-Mormon, like, podcast is influencing kids, as directly.
Yeah, I'm sure,
and
not
by the
kids.
same token, or teenagers, or even, I would even say, some young adults. But by that same logic, that also means that pro-Mormon content creators aren't influencing them either, because they're just not viewing them.
What are they looking at? Video games?
Some of them, some of them are like, I watch makeup tutorials, or they watch sports or something, or video games, right? Like Minecraft, huge. I don't know.
A lot of influencers talk over while they're playing video games, like Destiny or Hassan Piker or some sort of thing like that. But
that's true.
I don't know. All of my little nephews, the thing is, like, my extended family is just all 100% in, and it all works great for them, which is one of my major criticisms of that whole world. Is like, there has never been a moment in my entire life I wanted to go rip this away from anybody. Especially people say, well, it doesn't work for some people. Yeah, but a lot of people I know it really, really works for, and I'm not about to go march in and try to say, hey, did you know there's I don't know, whatever. And but I don't know what my nephews, who are kind of all of age, if they're I don't know if they even, like, got a lot. Maybe they're a little bit in, like, a Provo bubble or something like that. But I don't know. I guess you would know better than I do where the youth are, where the youngins are.
That's a good question. I wish we. Yeah. Well, I know. I mean, there's some sort of, like, classic, like, well-established things, like, if, like, your relationship with your parents is, like, the biggest predictor of, like, value transference. So, like, the transferring of values. So if you have a great relationship with your parents, you're more likely to adopt their values, and if they value religion, then you're more likely to adopt that. If and there's other things that show that, like, for example, the number of religious friends that you have as a teenager also is a really good predictor of whether or not you'll be religious in as an adult.
That might be it.
And then there's one other one that, like, that's actually a personality metric, which was, like, if you're high in openness and if you're high in conscientiousness, then you're more likely to be religious as an adult. But the strange thing about that is that usually conscientiousness and openness are inversely correlated.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very rare that you're high in both. But if you are high in both, then you're more likely to be religious.
Those are on different lines of the big five, right? But they just don't correlate well.
Personality. Yeah, usually, like, if you are more conscientious, you're less likely to be, like, super open, and vice versa. And so, but it's possible to be high in both. And if you are, then you're more likely to be religious, which is really crazy. But to me, that checks out. Like, like if you look at most apologists, especially the ones on social media and in the university, like if you're in university, then you're very much open to ideas, and if you're a professor, you're more or less conscientious, and if you're a content creator, you at least got your crap together to make content every
Yeah,
week or
that's
something,
true.
right? And so to me that kind of checks out, but it's like 1% of the population are like the actual content creators, right?
Yeah.
um
Well, some of it's just like bickering about it because I just watched on the Mormon newscast. That's RFM and Bill Real this week, where they were bickering about the announced numbers of the youth because they say that there was some like new report that more are leaving, and then there's a converse report that says more are coming, and
yeah,
even they kind of admit there's dual things there, and of course they're going to have their bias that it's for sure the leaving one, but they admit that there's
yeah.
reports on both sides of it with the young people that they're coming and they're going. But yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
well, I mean, that's one of the things about this article is I say that I just not, I'm really not around a whole lot of young people, and I might have been if I'd been participating in a ward bed or something like that. So I have no idea what's going on with them, but
Well, I'm curious, like what do you think, because your group is sort of a minority. It seems that way
way,
anyway. I don't know
way a
how true that
minority.
is.
Yeah, we're
But like what would appeal to, because like we get into discussions with people who've left, and it turns into a debate about like how true are our propositions. It's not really about that, really. I mean that's
but I
important.
thought most of the ex-Mormon world kind of got it. Like I said, they got more into the cultural and the how do you almost call it
Oh,
the
right, right.
moral finger pointing.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
got
like
it turned into
ethical.
moral finger pointing from 2012 on. They got away from the proposition. Uh, every once
Yeah,
in a
okay,
while
good
they'll
point.
still do it, but it's like
Mm.
RFM or Delin and those guys. It'll be like one every 5 episodes where they'll jump back into saying, "Okay, we're gonna say how the Book of Mormon was really written" or something like that. But then all the rest of them was, "Look how sexist this is, and look how women don't have."
Mm.
It's patriarchal. Patriarchal. That's the big word. Patriarchal. Patriarchal. Patriarchal
Oh
type
yeah.
stuff. And
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, yeah, I mean that reflects for sure like our data too. Like the number one thing was really hypocrisy. Number two was like institutional harm, which is a form of hypocrisy.
yeah,
And then number three was like epistemic, like propositional doubts, which is I not technically hypocrisy, but sort of, right, because the church claims to be true, but it can't justify its truth claims. So that's in my opinion, that's another form of hypocrisy. And then after that, like it's other things um someone offended me, I don't have time for church. And then there's of course like the I'm spiritual but not religious crowd. That, and I have a theory about that, but I don't, I like in my opinion, I think it's like if you are very self, nah, okay, I'm not using the word self-centered in a bad way. I mean, like, you can be other-centered or you can be self-centered in your attachment style, right? I'm not saying like self-centered in like a
I
like a
think it'd be
selfish
fine.
way.
I mean, I think like one of the large problems, as you mentioned, it is the extreme turn towards navel gazing. Like you cannot escape your head. Like everything is just always kind of stopping. Even if you like talk about like the therapy culture or whatever is built up, it's checking in on yourself constantly. Just
Yeah,
how am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? How do I feel? How do I type stuff?
yeah, yeah. I think so. My opinion is something like if you are sort of like self-centered versus other-centered, you're more likely to be spiritual but not religious. But if you're more other-centered, you're likely to just leave religion because like your community, the others in your life have offended you. Um, and so that's I think that's interesting. I do see like um very people who are like, yeah, it's all about me and my private relationship with God and nature, etc., and my energy and stuff like that. um anyway, so I'm trying to think in terms of community, like, how can we build bridges with people who have left? I'm looking at retention rates right now. The Eastern Orthodox Church is having a huge like retention, like explosion. Like they're retaining a lot of like people are coming back to Orthodox Christianity.
Yeah, that one got
Really,
huge. That I think
yeah, like
online helped push that one a whole lot. But
I think so too. I mean, yeah, I feel like. Jonathan Pajot,
He
probably
was
like
huge. He
single-handedly,
was huge for it.
yeah,
There's
got people to come back to
I've heard
Orthodox.
from the Orthodox churches is that they'll go and ask people if it was Jonathan Pajot or Jay Dyer that brought him there, type stuff, and sometimes they'll be a little standoffish, the Jay Dyer people, because they'll be the types of like the ortho bros who are going to show up there, and they see through like Andrew Wilson and Jay Dyer that the ortho guys are really good online debaters, and I want to be an online debater type stuff. But
Oh,
but yeah, I think the Pajot end of it, which is how he was able to turn it so much into, well, in a lot of the Vervaekian way, there's so much crossover there that it's like thinking about thinking in a way different way than
hmm.
just the propositional. You know what I mean? It's like patterns and so much of that is mixed into Orthodox stuff. Whereas I don't know. I've always kind of felt in a strange way Mormonism kind of sets up your thinking to be a little bit materialistic, and I mean that in the philosophical
Yeah,
sense, not in the to think like,
like not in a consumerism way,
yeah, like God is a body, God is on the earth, God
right?
has a scientific explanation, type stuff. We just
Yeah,
don't know it yet, but it's there, and type stuff. And
yeah. I think Mormonism for sure is like very materialistic and like radically materialistic,
mhm.
in that philosophical way, which is really interesting because it does allow us to like, that opens up a way to describe Mormonism in a mechanistic kind of mechanical scientific way, whereas that's sort of like not available to like other Christians,
that
which
might be a bar, because I kind of think Jonathan Pajot's phenomenology is kind of how he talks people into it. If you think about it, he's talking more about like what you're experiencing in your visual plane and pattern, and understanding and that sort of stuff as part of the reality of the cosmos, more than just the scientific world where there is a body God out there that is
yeah, that
discoverable.
is. So yeah, I see, like, so when I do my personal study, like I do see my philosophical inquiries like diverging. Like on the one hand, I'm a psychologist scientist that is like steeped in that like almost determinist tradition, but then at the same time I'm really drawn towards phenomenology and like um spirit and like, hermeneutic
Is
phenomenology
there a
where
way?
it's
I mean,
like,
I guess that is another way that Lobsters does blend that stuff in. And you're talking archetypes, talking
yeah, we do
Jung,
blend that
talking all
stuff
that
in.
stuff. And
Yeah,
is there a route for Mormonism in general, the same way that's been popularized in Orthodoxy? Because that's for sure part of what's popularized Orthodoxy, for Mormons
yeah.
to do that, or the LDS.
Well, what's interesting is like I've, when I first started reading about Jordan Peterson and some of these ideas, I like them and I'm like, oh, this is great. I don't know if other people will like them, but I would put them to the test, right? Anytime was asked to speak, I would like literally plagiarize my talk from Jordan Peterson. I would just add some Mormon things in it just to see if it like resonated with people. And I've had a lot of really great success. People are like, oh, these are fantastic talks. And I remember I gave a talk once on Elder Uchtdorf. He gave a talk a while back, a few years ago, um about how he lived in Germany and how the Mormon missionaries from America came, and he found them to be like a ray of sunlight, and in living in Germany, during like World War II especially, um like he would say like the cynicism was palpable, and everyone was like really discouraged and stuff, and I remember this was the year where for some reason like all the wards were like telling their congregants like, hey, here's a conference talk, just give a talk about the conference talk for sacrament meeting. We said okay, so we did that, and I tried to do kind of like this, like not phenomenological in the strict sense, but like at least trying to be like, let's try to look at this from the perspective of Elder Holland or Elder Uchtdorf in 1940, instead of just like laying out what the message was, like how is President Uchtdorf like experiencing this himself, right? And it was a fun talk. I had a really great time, and it really resonated with a lot of people. But so I see there's a big value there's value in the phenomenological approach where like you're trying to understand experience and how things come into your experience, and how your experience is shaped and your ontology like informs your experience and all that stuff. I think it's cool, and worthwhile. It is a bit at odds with like the materialist determinist lens where it's like, well, you're just a bunch of synapses firing, etc. But eventually we'll have to, like, some genius philosophical guy will bridge those traditions, right? It's not gonna be me, but
Why not? You could do it. I mean, that's basically going to like
a
the
lot of
other
people do
P's,
it.
but like, I mean, if you followed all Vervaeke stuff, like Vervaeke had his whole series on like how to think like Plato, and
Yeah,
that thing kind of melted my brain a whole lot, and it's really just kind of retraining your brain to think like a pre-modern person. And there is
yeah.
some sort of sense that I know that just from being LDS, which does have the materialist way of thinking, and growing up in this environment to get Foucauldian on myself, I grew up in this
Mhm.
episteme where the we are trained that everything is just the scientific propositional and all that sorts of stuff. And it was just like Pajau, but Vervaeke even kind of goes more into maybe just this straight philosophical sense of thinking in a different way, thinking in that patterned way, thinking in that experiential way, those
Yeah,
propositional and participatory ways, which, yeah, I mean, it'd be awesome if people could really blend that and bring that in together. But just like you're saying, it's kind of hard to think about how to do that into the LDS, like how would you canonize that, or make it part of a curriculum or
yeah,
something like that?
exactly. I don't know. I don't know. But I do think, that's why I love the lobsters, man. This is where we can go, entertain these ideas. But yeah, I think, you know, I think we're at a point where if you guys are starting to get some limelight, let's say, right, like people are starting to notice you guys, I think that's a great indicator that, like, I think people are getting tired of this old sort of ex-Mormon way of thinking that's like this very Foucauldian informed type thing. I think we're all ready for the next thing, and even in politics, I see like it waning, like this woke thing starting, its influence is starting to diminish a bit, and I think that's great. I think it's going to open up like greater idea. It's going to open the door to greater ideas that I think we'll all benefit from. I hope, anyway.
Hopefully so. I mean, listen, like I said, listen to that last bit. You don't even have to listen to the whole episode of Greg Quick with Delin. Just listen to the last fifth of it and just hear how John's been rethinking it, which I've actually heard him chirp about that a few different times. And I was, in a sense, a lot of the things that we were, if you go back and listen to our episodes, which nobody should ever do, we're just always there talking forever. But exactly what we were barking at him for so long was exactly what he's kind of starting to turn the corner on, of just starting to realize how his biases have influenced things and things that he is unable to do, like cosmic problems that are out of his hands and types of
Mm.
stuff, and realizing it's not so easy to just leave, and then all sorts of problems and issues. And who's to say, like, they can chirp forever about Mormon and early polygamy, and then everybody goes, okay, I'm ex-Mormon, now I'm polyamorous the next day, and people just
Yeah,
don't stop
yeah.
and say. And John's, if you listen to that, he's actually become highly aware of and bothered by that phenomenon. And yeah,
Oh
yeah,
wow, that's
yeah.
crazy.
People realize that you're not just walking away from something little when it's
Yeah.
something that built up a community like this. Something that Steve Pinecker always says is, why did he get so interested in Mormonism? Is like made the desert bloom like the rose. Anything that does that needs to be examined,
Mm.
and it's also kind of true, especially if people even start endeavoring to try to recreate anything like that on their own and fail at it.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah,
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, I'm glad we had this conversation. I do
that's
gotta
fun.
go.
I just had
But
one question.
yeah, yeah,
Why is so you're going into psychology, right? And you're
yeah.
going to be like you want to be a one-on-one psychologist with people, that type of deal, like
Right.
what Delin went through. Why is Peterson super canceled there? Is it the Jungism or is it the conservatism? Why is he persona
You
non
know,
grata there?
um so of course, like
And
in
at
psychology,
BYU, even like that's where you're going to grad school.
yeah, okay, that's a really good question. That's a great question. So BYU, I think, truly does have like a diversity of thought because it's not predominantly liberal, right? There's actual conservatives there. And so the psychology department is mostly liberal, but they have a few conservatives. And I work with both liberal and conservative professors at BYU. And the more liberal professors don't like Jordan Peterson, and I'm not sure why. And honestly, I've been scared to ask them because I don't want to like I don't want them to think bad of me for liking Jordan Peterson. But I will drop little like hints. I'm like, oh yeah, I gave him a Book of Mormon one time.
Oh, I was there.
you know,
I saw you do that.
oh, you
I
were
was
there?
there.
Oh
Yeah,
no way.
me and Kevin, who I just mentioned a few times, we saw you do it. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow, that's awesome,
yeah.
man.
But just to say the last thing on that, but maybe even like the Peterson moments a little bit moved on. I mean, he's been sick and everything, but it's kind of
Yeah,
like
I think
everybody
so.
got what they were. He might have new ideas, but then he just kind of turned to like commenting on the political. So maybe it's like it's
Yeah.
already just like part of your knapsack, and most people are like, well, nobody's trying to push pure Jordan Peterson ism anymore. It's just part of the repertoire back here.
Yeah, I think that's true. When as I've spoken to undergraduates, a lot of undergraduates like Jordan Peterson, and a lot of them are into psychology because of Jordan Peterson. A lot of the professors, I think, especially the left leaning ones, are like they're kind of like they don't want to get canceled either, and they're like, oh, we don't like they usually say like we don't like Trump, we don't like Elon, we don't like Jordan. And I again, I don't really like I avoid talking to professors about politics because it's not a very comfortable subject. The conservative professors are a little better, and they're more like open minded to like, oh yeah, you're into Jordan Peterson, and a lot of them will even say like, that's cool. I haven't really read him, but of course I've heard about him. Um, but then you get into sociology, and sociology is even more liberal than psychology, and I think would say it's even more activist in its orientation, of course. And this is my personal experience and opinion, but those students are just more like more confrontational. And so you bring up Jordan Peterson, and people start getting like uncomfortable and like combative, and they start to debate and things like that. And so for sure, like he's persona non grata in that department.
So what about
Um,
since like that? I think even most of the lobsters would kind of agree. Like the Peterson moments, kind of there. It was a huge moment, but it's maybe kind of flown by
yeah,
a little bit. Love the name, the lobsters. It's an awesome name, but what about getting away from that so that you can be fully? What about just turning the whole thing to rough stone trolling or something like that? And
that's a good question. I mean, I want to do the channel on its own. I don't know if the group will one day. I don't think it's gonna. It's at least it's not the right moment for it to like disband the Jordan
I wouldn't
Peterson
disband it,
moment
but just
thing.
make it so you could fully integrate it into what you're doing.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I do want to bridge those two. I remember watching a video about like Jordan Peterson becoming like passe or whatever. And the title of the video was something like, "Has Jordan Peterson lost the youth?" And I'm like, no, well, yeah, he did because all the youth grew up. Like it's been 10 years since he's been super popular. We're all old now. Um, and so um but I think the thing that has really sustained lobsters all this time is the ideas, especially like free speech. I think that is just a fantastic idea, a value that we all, especially if you're American, it's something that we really value. I have friends in Germany and in England and stuff, and I hear about like how you can get tickets for praying in front of an abortion clinic
Oh
and
yeah,
stuff.
jeez.
Things like that happen, and then I'm like, yeah, free speech is a good thing, and we have to hold that dear. Um, so I'm
I
trying to
don't
think
think
at
a lot of
BYU.
Peterson's best ideas. I don't think are passe. It's just that we all know him now. You know what I mean? So it's like it's in the
Yeah,
knapsack, and
maybe that's true too, and maybe um, well, here's a really interesting example. I took a clinical psychology class, and we were talking about how psychology took like a multicultural turn, right? And people were talking about if the first at first the hot thing was like multicultural competence, like you have to be multiculturally competent in your practice, and you have to like be aware of people's cultures and things like that. But then they basically discovered like the intersectionality problem. It's like, well, you have all these people, and they're in the nexus of a bunch of different intersections of cultures, and it's impossible for you to be competent in all of them at the same time. It's just not going to happen. And
is
so
that where they start getting that they want like it should be that you should have a psychologist that's the same race as you or the same sex as you, type stuff. Do they get into that idea,
The,
or that you should be able
uh,
to weave in and out of all of them as a?
yeah, that was the cultural competency idea. You know, it would be ideal if we had a bunch of like multicultural psychologists of different races and backgrounds, but most of them are white and most of them are, I think, male or female. I can't remember. So there's imbalances. And then, of course, you just can't be competent at all of them, at all the intersections. And so then they said, okay, actually, we need to do what's called cultural humility, where we can't be competent, but we have to be humble. And Jordan Peterson makes that point he made that point in 2017,
The infinite
and he
one
was
at
like getting
Harvard,
canceled.
the infinite dissection
Yeah,
into
yeah,
the individual. Yeah.
yeah, that's right. In that lecture, yeah, and so then like literally later that year in 2017, this other guy, I can't remember his name, I think it's like Kenneth something, but he wrote a book called Cultural Humility, and then he sort of like outlines the same argument. I remember sitting in clinical psych, I'm like, well, this is exactly what Jordan was talking about. So I raised my hand, I said, Professor, this is great. I'm curious, like, did the author receive blowback for this book? And he's like, oh, 100%. Like, this rocked like the world, like the clinical psych world. This guy was like also getting canceled, but now it's like it's the standard part of the clinical textbook now. Like, we're all into cultural humility instead of cultural competence. And so, you know, I think you're right. Like, when if you go back and you read Maps of Meaning, for example, Jordan's ideas, like, he has tons and tons of footnotes, and all the ideas he has referenced them to someone else. And so a lot of his ideas aren't exactly unique, but he does synthesize them in a sort of clever way, and I think that's fantastic. Um, so maybe yeah, so I think a lot of the ideas that Jordan has are gonna, like, we're gonna continue talking about them. I think Jordan Peterson, because of his health and because of, like, I think the moment he stopped being interviewed by journalists is the moment, like, that he, like, kind of lost his influence, because it was fun to see him debate journalists who were like kind of like, like, journalists aren't academics, like they don't write very technically either. They're just like whipping up like quick articles, and so none of them are a match for any college professor in terms of like arguing a point. And but so it was fun to see Jordan like take that on, but then the moment he stopped, it was like not fun anymore. It's like, oh, okay, he's just like talking to people who are his caliber and they're understanding him, and that's not as fun as being misunderstood and correcting someone, right?
Yeah.
um but anyway,
It
so
was always
yeah.
tough for people just in the popular sense of talking to Peterson and the journalists, and they'd get into, people try to call it postmodern, the way he'd get questioning on what a word meant. And you'd be
Oh
like,
yeah,
have
yeah,
you guys studied any philosophy? Like, do you want to
yeah.
read the 6 books by Heidegger on the word being, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly, on Dasein.
Yeah.
It's like the yeah, seriously. No, yeah, I think I do think, especially on YouTube and among journalists, his ideas are criticized very poorly. um and I, you know, where I just did a poll in Lobsters, like, oh, let's do a book club, what are we gonna read? We're gonna read uh 12 Rules for
No,
Life.
really?
And so people are still, yeah, that was the number one voted thing. I was surprised. I'm like, well, that book is old now, but people are still interested in the ideas. I think Peterson is still like, he still has a lot of momentum. But I do know, like, there's always a shelf life on any thinker, you know, like, because people grow old, and, you know, people who are going on their missions
Well,
today
beyond that,
are,
it's just like in the culture, just like Foucault's in the culture, Peterson's in the culture now.
oh yeah,
Like,
that's true.
clean
That's a
your
more
rooms
positive
in the
spin.
culture now, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's valid. Yeah. So anyway, well, man, thanks for
Yeah.
talking. We should do this
Yeah, for
again. I
sure.
feel like we could talk for
Yeah, it was
hours.
fun. Yeah.
But yeah,
Any
and
old time.
awesome. Congrats on being mentioned in the Deseret
Oh
News,
yeah,
and
but
thanks for
you
being
want
part
to
of
know?
the
I didn't say
Lobsters.
anything
And
to my family or anything like that to see if they'd noticed. They haven't yet. I'll point it out to them sooner or later. But I guess not that many people read the
you
Desert
gotta.
News anymore. But
That's hilarious. You gotta film the
yeah.
reaction.
So, all right.
Well, I guess that's like the next best thing. Like, you know, you're not back at church yet, but you're in the Deseret News. You know, you're just one foot in.
Yeah. So, all right. Yeah.
Cool, man.
Thanks for chatting,
All
man.
right.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.